impact on the brain and behavior.
Right.
I've got some really interesting excerpts to go through
Oh.
from Your Brain on Porn by Gary Wilson and Anthony Jack.
Okay.
They really blend personal stories and the science together in a way that I think will really make you think.
Yeah.
So, first off,
Sure.
the internet has changed how we access
Yeah.
pretty much everything.
Right.
But when it comes to porn specifically,
Yeah.
what do you think has really shifted?
Well, you can think of it like you know how the printing press revolutionized access to information.
Right.
The internet's done the same thing, but on like a massive scale. So we went from, kind of limited access to
Yeah.
this sudden explosion of content.
Right.
And that includes adult content.
Of course.
And it's really reshaped how we think about and experience sexuality.
It's interesting, though, because
Yeah.
the very thing that fueled that early internet boom was porn.
Right.
But now it's like, it makes it harder to even talk about it,
Yeah, that's true.
have open conversations
Yeah,
about sex and porn's influence.
It's a weird paradox.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
strange paradox.
It is. We've also moved from like a more social understanding of pornography
Okay.
to a very individualized experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the brain for a second.
Sure.
We all know that certain things trigger pleasure responses.
Of course.
Good food,
Mhm.
attractive people.
Yeah.
All that good stuff.
Mhm.
Where does porn fit into all of this?
Well, the ventral striatum, which
Yeah.
is a key part of the brain's reward circuitry, that lights up when we experience pleasure.
But-
Here's the thing. It's not just about basic urges. The ventral striatum also plays a vital role in our social behavior,
Interesting.
like feeling connected to others, acting in a way that benefits others.
That's interesting because the book actually talks about how internet porn can sometimes mess with those social connections.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely.
Like if you're spending hours online immersed in this fantasy world, it makes sense that it would impact your real life relationships.
Exactly. You're substituting a virtual world for the real one.
Right.
And that can lead to isolation,
Good.
even if you're technically connected to people online.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole concept of supernormal stimuli,
Yeah.
which the book uses to explain
Yeah.
how internet porn can actually become more stimulating than real life experiences.
Right.
How does that work?
So our brains are wired to seek out novelty and excitement.
Right.
Dopamine plays a big role in this. Dopamine's a neurochemical associated with pleasure,
Yeah.
the internet porn, with its constant stream of new and often extreme content, can trigger those dopamine rushes in a really powerful way.
So it's like the brain gets used to that heightened level of stimulation, and then real life just can't compete.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And over time, this can lead to a kind of desensitization.
Okay.
So the brain needs more and more stimulation to achieve the same level of pleasure.
And that's where the book starts to get into some of the potential negative consequences of excessive porn use.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like some people finding real life sex less appealing or needing more extreme content to get aroused.
Yeah, and this can be especially concerning for young men who are still developing their sexual identities and habits.
Right.
The book highlights stories of young guys experiencing erectile dysfunction and other issues that seem to be linked to their internet porn use.
It's scary to think that something that seems so commonplace could have such a profound impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
But the book also talks about how the brain has this amazing ability to rewire itself.
It does.
So there's hope, right?
Absolutely.
People can change their habits.
Yes.
And get their brains back on track.
The brain is incredibly adaptable. It's not a hopeless situation by any means, but it does take effort and a willingness to make changes.
So the book talks about this idea of rebooting.
Yes.
Giving the brain a break.
Yeah.
From artificial sexual stimuli.
Right.
To reset its reward system.
Yeah, it's like hitting the refresh button on your brain.
And that reboot involves a whole lot more than just abstaining from porn, right?
It does.
It's about identifying those triggers that lead to porn use.
Right.
Building new routines.
Yeah.
Finding support.
It's about rewiring those neural pathways, essentially.
Yeah, this rebooting is a pretty comprehensive approach.
It is. And one of the most important things is to be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
It takes time for the brain to rewire itself.
Sure.
Recovery is a process. It doesn't happen overnight.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, and I have to admit, some of this is pretty intense.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious, Are there specific examples from the book, stories that really illustrate how internet porn can impact people's lives? I think that would help connect the science to the reality of what some people are experiencing.
For sure.
Mm.
For example, the book mentions a man who found himself increasingly unable to connect with his partner sexually after years of internet porn use. He
Right.
described it as,
Mm.
feeling like he was just going through the motions, like something was missing.
Wow, that's heartbreaking.
It is. But what's important to remember is that this man, and many others like him, found ways to regain control and rediscover their sexuality in a healthier way.
Oh.
They sought help, developed new coping mechanisms, and made conscious choices to prioritize their well being.
So it's not a hopeless situation,
Oh,
but it does require awareness,
yeah,
effort, and support.
exactly.
It's amazing how our brains can get so used to those dopamine hits,
Yeah,
even if they're coming from something that might ultimately be harmful.
it's true.
The book mentions withdrawal symptoms.
Oh, yeah.
When people try to cut back on internet porn,
Right.
irritability, anxiety, sleep problems,
Yeah.
it's like their brains are going through a kind of detox.
Yeah. It's true when you're used to that level of stimulation. Taking that away can definitely lead to those kinds of withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
It's a sign the brain's trying to recalibrate, to find a new equilibrium.
And speaking of recalibration,
Mhm.
one of the things that really stuck with me from the book is this idea of how internet porn can affect the way we perceive and experience pleasure in general.
That's a fascinating aspect.
Yeah.
Think of it this way: if you're constantly exposing your brain to highly stimulating, often exaggerated content, it can actually change your baseline for what you find pleasurable.
So it's like training your taste buds to crave junk food.
I.
After a while, those healthier,
Right.
more nuanced flavors just don't seem as satisfying.
Exactly. You start to need more and more intensity to get the same level of pleasure.
Right.
And that can have a ripple effect on other areas of your life, not just your sexuality.
Huh, that makes sense. It's like the book says the brain is a pleasure seeking organ, but it's also a meaning seeking organ. If we're not finding meaning and fulfillment in our lives, we're more likely to turn to those quick hits of dopamine, even if they're not ultimately good for us.
Right, and internet porn can be a particularly potent source of dopamine, especially with its constant novelty and accessibility. It's designed to keep you engaged, keep you coming back for more.
But the book also emphasizes that we're not powerless in this.
Absolutely no.
We can retrain our brains
We can.
to find pleasure in things that are actually nourishing and sustainable.
Absolutely. It's like rewiring your brain's reward system to appreciate those simpler, more authentic sources of joy.
But I imagine the rewiring process isn't always easy.
It's not. It often involves some discomfort, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
There might be cravings, emotional ups and downs, even a sense of boredom as the brain adjusts to this new way of being.
So, what are some practical things people can do to navigate that process?
One of the key things is to identify those triggers that lead to porn use in the first place. Is it certain websites, times of day, specific emotions? Once you've pinpointed those triggers, you can start to develop alternative behaviors,
Yeah.
healthier ways to cope.
Like, for example, instead of automatically reaching for your phone when you're feeling stressed, maybe you go for a walk, listen to music, call a friend.
Exactly. It's about interrupting that automatic response and replacing it with something that's more in line with your values and goals.
The book also talks about the importance of mindfulness in this process.
Mindfulness is key. It's about becoming more aware of your thoughts, feelings, and urges without judgment.
Right.
It's about creating a space between the stimulus and your response so you can make a conscious choice.
And I imagine that kind of self awareness takes practice.
It does, but the more you practice, the better you become at recognizing those patterns and choosing a different path.
What about support? The book mentions finding a community, either online or offline, where people can share their experiences and offer encouragement.
That's so important. Knowing you're not alone in this can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
There are online forums, support groups, even therapists who specialize in this. There are resources out there. Don't be afraid to reach out for help.
It's inspiring to hear that, even though there can be these really challenging aspects to how internet porn affects our brains. There are also ways to regain control and find healthier sources of pleasure. It's like you said earlier, it's about rewiring those reward pathways to appreciate the simple joys of life.
And that can be an incredibly rewarding process in itself. You start to notice things you hadn't noticed before. You appreciate the beauty around you in a whole new way. You find joy in connection, in creativity, in simply being present in the moment.
It sounds like a journey of rediscovering those authentic sources of pleasure that might have gotten lost along the way.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your life, living it to the full.
So we've talked about the brain science, the potential negative impacts of internet porn, and some practical strategies for regaining control. But what about the bigger picture? What are some of the broader societal implications of this issue?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
On a societal level, I think it's important to have open and honest conversations about the impact of internet pornography. We need to educate young people about the potential risks and help them develop healthy relationships with technology and sexuality.
It's like we need to create a culture
Mm,
where it's okay to talk about these things, where people feel comfortable seeking help if they need it.
I agree. And we need to be mindful of how the constant bombardment of hypersexualized imagery is affecting our perceptions of relationships, intimacy, and even ourselves.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this larger conversation
Mm.
and that our individual choices have ripple effects.
And it's about using our voices to advocate for a more balanced and healthy approach to sexuality and technology.
So it's not just about individual responsibility, it's about creating a cultural shift
Yeah,
where we prioritize well being over instant gratification.
exactly. It's about fostering a society
Yeah.
where we value connection, authenticity, and respect.
Speaking of respect, the book also delves into the issue of consent and how internet porn can sometimes blur the lines between fantasy and reality.
That's a crucial point. It's vital to remember that what we see in pornography is not always a reflection of real life relationships or healthy sexual practices.
That's like the difference between watching a movie and living your life. One is a form of entertainment, the other is reality. And it's important not to confuse the two.
Absolutely. We need to be critical consumers of media, especially when it comes to something as powerful and influential as pornography.
And we need to be mindful of the messages we're internalizing
Right.
and how they might be shaping our beliefs and behaviors.
Right. It's about being aware of the potential influence of media and making conscious choices about what we consume and how we allow it to affect us.
And that awareness starts with having these conversations, with educating ourselves and each other. It's about creating a space where we can talk about these things openly and honestly, without shame or judgment. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do here on the deep dive.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power. And the more we understand about how internet porn affects our brains and our lives, the better equipped we are to make choices that are in our best interests.
So, what's the final takeaway here? If someone is listening to this and thinking, wow, this is a lot to process, where do they even begin?
I think the first step is to just be curious. Ask yourself some questions. How do you feel about your own relationship with internet porn? Is it something you're concerned about? Is it affecting your life in ways you don't like?
And if the answer is yes, don't be afraid to seek help. There are resources out there. You're not alone.
Exactly. There are people who understand what you're going through and who can help you find a path to recovery and well being.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I'm learning so much, and I know our listeners are too. But before we wrap up, there's one more fascinating concept from the book that I want to touch on, this idea of rewiring your brain to find pleasure in things that are, well, let's just say, less intense than internet porn.
Okay,
Tell me more about that.
that's a really interesting point. The book talks about how the brain can actually become more sensitive to those everyday pleasures. A beautiful sunset, a heartfelt conversation, a delicious meal. Once it's had a chance to reset itself, it's like recalibrating your pleasure sensors to appreciate the subtle beauty of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's like we're rediscovering the joy in the ordinary.
And that can be incredibly powerful. Suddenly, those things that we might have taken for granted become more vibrant, more meaningful.
So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure, it's about finding it in sources that are actually nourishing and sustainable.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a richer, more fulfilling experience of life.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how we can kind of retrain ourselves
Mhm.
to appreciate those simpler pleasures. I mean, we're so bombarded with stimuli all the time. It's easy to forget how good it feels to just, sit and watch the sunset or have a deep conversation with someone you care about.
It's like our brains have gotten accustomed to this constant dopamine drip,
Right.
and we've kind of lost touch with those more subtle, but ultimately more fulfilling sources of pleasure.
But the book emphasizes that we can change that.
For sure.
It talks about how the brain has this incredible capacity for neuroplasticity,
Mm,
which means we can literally rewire our brains
yeah.
by changing our habits and thought patterns.
And that's really empowering. It means we're not stuck with the brains we're born with.
Right.
We can actively shape our brains and our experiences through the choices we made.
So if someone's listening to this
Yeah.
and feeling overwhelmed, like they're caught in this cycle of instant gratification, what's the first step they can take to start rewiring their brains for healthier pleasure?
Well, awareness is key. Start by paying attention to your habits, your triggers, the things you turn to for pleasure. Notice what makes you feel good and what leaves you feeling empty or dissatisfied.
And the book mentions journaling is a helpful tool for this.
Yeah, journaling can be incredibly beneficial. It allows you to track your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, which can help you identify patterns and make conscious changes.
It's like shining a light on those unconscious habits
Yeah,
that might be driving your choices.
exactly. And once you're aware of those habits, you can start to make different choices. Maybe instead of spending hours scrolling through social media, you pick up a book, go for a hike, connect with a friend.
And over time, those new choices become new habits, which lead to new neural pathways in the brain. It's like
Yeah.
you're literally reshaping your brain's reward system
Yeah.
to appreciate those healthier, more fulfilling experiences.
It's a gradual process,
Yeah,
but it's powerful.
yeah.
And the book emphasizes it's never too late to start. Our brains are adaptable throughout our lives.
And it's not about being perfect,
Right.
it's about progress.
It's about taking small steps in the right direction.
Absolutely.
It's about being patient with yourself and celebrating those small victories along the way.
And I love how the book emphasizes the importance of self compassion in this process.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about beating yourself up for past choices, it's about making a conscious decision to move forward in a healthier way.
Self compassion is crucial. It's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a good friend.
And I think that's a really important message for everyone, regardless of their relationship with internet porn.
Yeah.
We all need to be kinder to ourselves, especially when we're struggling.
I agree. We live in a culture that often emphasizes perfection and achievement, but the truth is, we're all human. We all make mistakes. It's how we learn and grow.
So if you're listening to this and feeling like you need to make some changes, remember that you're not alone. There are resources available to help you. There are people who understand what you're going through and who can support you on your journey.
And remember that change is possible. Your brain is incredibly adaptable, and you have the power to rewire it for a healthier, more fulfilling life.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the impact of internet pornography. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope you found this exploration as insightful and thought provoking as I have.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we understand about how our brains work and how they're affected by our choices, the better equipped we are to live lives that are aligned with our values and goals. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep choosing those paths that lead to a more authentic and fulfilling life. Thanks for listening.